those we seek to serve.
Thank you.
So I'll call the regular council meeting to order and go to item 2.1 on the agenda, which is the introduction of late items, and it's there for your information. Do we need a motion to add that?
Yes, Your Worship,
Yes.
we do. And also there's one additional late item,
Okay.
which is the revised business license bylaw. And this is to replace item 9.3. So I've passed it out to council members as well as to the audience.
Okay. And it's reflected in the agenda, the amended agenda.
The bylaw is not, the letter is.
Okay, thank you. All right, so a motion to approve those two late items. Moved, seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on those? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we move to adoption of the agenda, and that would be adopted as amended. Thank you. Second. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have the adoption of a whole number of minutes. So there's item 4.1, which is the adoption of the November 16th regular council minutes as presented.
So moved.
Moved. Seconder. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4.2, which is the November 20th Committee of the Whole operating budget minutes as presented. Moved. Thank you. Seconder. Seconded. Any questions? Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Item 4.3, which is the adoption of the November 30th special council minutes. Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We have item 4.4, which is the adoption of the November 30th Committee of the Whole capital budget minutes as presented. Moved. Thank you. Seconder. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Item 4.5, which is the December 7th council minutes, and that's for adoption. Regular council minutes, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, so we've completed that. So we move on to delegations, and we've got 3 delegations this evening, which is wonderful, just before Christmas. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So I'm going to first recognize Patrick Barbosa and Janelle Davis from VIU. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Is it Jeanette or Janelle?
Janelle.
Thank you.
Janelle. Did I say Jeanette?
Oh, it's printed
Oh, it's
differently.
printed? Oh, I've got it correct.
We got it
correct
both
in my
ways
agenda.
in the
So.
paperwork, so.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Barbosa, and I work for the Vancouver Island University Students' Union.
Great.
And my name is Janelle Davies. I'm the Secretary-Chair of the Canadian Federation of Students, British Columbia, as well as a student at Douglas College in the Lower Mainland.
Great.
The Canadian Federation of Students' background for folks represents students from across British Columbia and 15 colleges and universities across this province. It's about 200,000 members.
Which one do I push?
Maybe it's this one.
Oh, yeah, the little one that
So we got
Sorry. Thanks, sir. Do you need to get that off there?
Too many remotes that always get you.
this remote.
There we go.
All right.
You still got,
Still got one up there.
Peter, you still got something up there.
I'll figure out. Anyways.
In my defense, the remote was here.
Yes.
Anyways, while we get the...
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Yay.
Well, welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you
and,
so
looking
much.
forward to presentation. Because we have 3 delegations tonight, I'll just let you know that our policy is a 10-minute presentation with a little bit of leeway.
A little bit of wiggle room.
And there'll be questions likely.
Okay. All right, so we're here today to discuss adult basic education and our campaign that is called Don't Close the Doors.
Could you speak really close?
Oh, like that?
That's
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Thank you.
So we're here to present our campaign Don't Close the Doors, and it's about adult basic education in the province of British Columbia. And just to give folks a little bit of background about what adult basic education is, there's basically 3 types of students seeking adult education. Adult basic education is anything from K-12 courses that are available in the K-12 system. So a lot of folks have to do upgrading to get, say, a higher mark in English 12, Biology 12, Science 11, those sorts of things. And there's 3 types of students that seek this education. One of those are those folks that are looking to complete their high school courses. So for whatever reason, they couldn't complete their courses in their first run at the K-12 system, and so they go to post-secondary in order to complete that dogwood certification. There's also those folks seeking to upgrade their high school courses. So there's a number of post-secondary courses that require a minimum grade credit. Say you were a student when you graduated, you didn't need a science credit, for instance, and then you want to go back into nursing in your later years. You would have to get those science credits that are available in grades 11 and 12 in order to fulfill the prerequisites for the university courses. And those are folks that would also seek to go through the post-secondary system to get these adult basic education courses. And there's also those just seeking to improve basic literacy or numeracy in the province. So if they need any extra help understanding contracts or getting a better handle on academic language, they could take those courses through the post-secondary system as well. Adult basic education also includes developmental disabilities and those enrolled in what is called special education programs. Those are often courses like teaching cashiering skills and that sort of thing to folks that need that extra help. And adult basic education also includes English as second language training for mostly new immigrants that come to the country that need not basic English language skills, but more the academic kind of English courses is what is sort of captured under here typically for students.
There we go. So essentially there's some data around who attends adult basic education in our province, and we know that about 58% of people who attend ABE are actually women. 18% of folks who are attending an adult basic education are Indigenous backgrounds. 20% are parents while they're studying, and I was actually a good example of someone who went back to take ABE when they were a single parent. 55% of folks are employed while they're studying in adult basic education, and 79% have already graduated from high school. And 70% of those folks continue their studies on to go to, academic courses, take a bachelor's degree, take a bachelor's of science, maybe take a trades program. And so it's quite an important gateway for a lot of students who are looking to make a meaningful role for themselves in the British Columbia economy. And it's quite a great gateway for communities to make sure that those folks who aren't necessarily receiving the type of employment that they need to receive to support their families have access to those opportunities.
Just a bit of a history of adult basic education in the province of British Columbia. This it's kind of gone back and forth for how it is funded. In 1998, all adult basic education courses, including fundamental programs and adult basic education, so any courses in the K-12 system, were tuition-free in the post-secondary system. So anybody could go to Vancouver Island University, Douglas College, get their English 12 credit, and then ladder into academic courses if that's what they wanted to do, and all tuition fee-free. But then in 2002, it was mandated that anybody who's completed high school already, so if you graduated, you had to pay tuition fees on your adult basic education program. And what happened in 2002 was there was a major decrease in folks that could attend and were laddering into those sort of academic programs. So if you were like me, when I graduated, there was no requirement for an upper level grade 11 or 12 science. Computer technologies counted as a science credit, and so that's what 16-year-old me decided to take for an easy credit and not to study biology. The year after I graduated, however, biology 11 or 12 or science 11 to 12 became a mandatory course on graduation. So I went into post-secondary having 0 science credits. I only have science 8. And so I can't actually get into any of the biology, chemistry, physics courses because I don't have that prerequisite. In 2002, because I had graduated from high school, I would have to pay for those adult basic educations. Though if you were in 2002 and you hadn't graduated high school, you could get those courses for free from whatever institution or the K-12 system just to complete your dogwood. And so we saw a lot of people not laddering into, say, nursing, the trades programs that require math requirements, because how often do people make the appropriate decisions for their life when they're 16, 17? Sometimes you rush through just to graduate, or you change your mind of what you want to study when you're older. And so there was a decrease in folks getting into those sorts of important programming. So in 2007, the provincial government abolished tuition fees on all adult basic upgrading courses in the K-12 and the post-secondary system. And they did that through quite an extensive study. It was called the Campus 2020 report, if folks recognize that. But it was basically a kind of visioning of what the post-secondary system should look like here in British Columbia. And one of the things that they noticed was reducing the barriers of getting these basic upgrading courses allowed people to get into those sort of in-demand trades, nursing, carpentry, all those sorts of things. And so it was an important aspect to get people in the door so that they could start getting into these really important courses for our economy.
So maybe I'll just ask, how are we for time? Because we have a few slides to go through still. Anyone? We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm old enough to remember back when Murray Cole made this announcement. So in 2007, after extensive lobbying by the student movement in British Columbia, we were able to put enough pressure on the Gordon Campbell BC Liberals and then Minister of Advanced Education, Murray Cole, to make the decision that Janelle just referred to. And this was what they essentially said. We are helping people upgrade their education so they can take advantage of our growing economy and enjoy rewarding careers. By offering free tuition for adult basic education, whether students have graduated from high school or not. And so that's a pretty strong endorsement from the then Minister of Advanced Education. It really was a hard victory won by students. We definitely made a case that adult basic education needed to be free. That, in 1900, when we decided to make K-12 free in British Columbia, the same rationale kind of applied today in 2007. And if anything, one could make the argument that to provide the same level of education to folks today, you really would have to give them maybe a bachelor's degree, because I know in 1900, if you had a grade 12, you were probably pretty highly educated compared to the general population.
So which leads us to today and where we're at with adult basic education. So in December 2014, the provincial government announced a $6.9 million funding cut to adult basic education. And that $6.9 million is basically to fund the entire post-secondary tuition, adult basic education at tuition free. So they removed that funding and then announced that post-secondary institutions would be allowed to place tuition fees on the ABE courses to make up that difference that they were getting in funding. So I think at this point, almost every institution in British Columbia has put tuition fees on adult basic education, with I think the exception of Selkirk College and the Kootenays. And those institutions, as of January 1st, 2015, could charge up to $1,600 per semester or $320 a course for all adult basic, adult upgrading courses. And again, these are courses you can get free in the K-12 system. There's no post-secondary credential applied to them. It's simply high school upgrading courses. Then in May 1st, and then when that cut happened in January, the ministry told folks you can go back to the K-12 system in order to fulfill your credentials to get into the upgrading. So it doesn't have to be administrated and given through the post-secondary institutions. The problem we had with that is adult learners learn significantly better in environments where they're with other adult learners. And so going back as an adult, going back to the K-12 system to learn at night school, with a variety of different learning backgrounds is quite difficult. Those are difficult classes to teach, and they just don't have the success rates that they do through the post-secondary institutions. So on May 1st, but then in May 1st, the government cut funding to the school districts for tuition-free adult basic education, so the only school districts that can offer it for free are the ones that have the money to do so, and we know from around the province that school district funding is quite tight these days in a lot of different places. There was a slight increase to the adult upgrading grant program, but we'll talk about some of the limitations to that program.
So the BC government, in their announcement in the previous year, did announce an increase for a 33% increase to the AUG grant, the Adult Upgrading Grant. That grant used to just cover tuition fees. Under the new program, it was designed to cover tuition fees, textbooks, supplies, childcare, and transportation. The challenge with that grant is really it's twofold. One, the government didn't supply enough money to meet the need, and we know this from financial aid administrators on our campus. We talk to them regularly. And the other piece is people are being left behind. So to be eligible for the AUG grant, you have to earn a maximum, if you're working full-time and you have one child, you can earn a maximum of $11.40 an hour. So if you're earning $11.41 an hour, you are making too much money and you have to pay for adult basic education courses because you're too rich. They do have an allowance for people to make up to 10% above the threshold, and if you're within that 10% difference, you can still receive up to 50% of the cost of your adult basic education. So if you're taking English 12 and Math 11 so that you can move on and maybe do social degree, diploma in social degree or social work, or a degree in social work, you're going to have to pay up to $640 for the course, plus textbooks, plus lost wages where you're not working, potentially you're going to pay for childcare. We believe that these are all substantial barriers that are making it very challenging for people who are on the margin to move forward and find meaningful roles in our economy.
Okay, so we're running a little bit over, and we have 2 other delegations, so if you could conclude, and then we'll, I see we have a resolution here as well.
Okay. We're going to just jump through a couple of slides. Just as a quick note, this is, I don't know what changed between 2007 and 2014. We have the same government, and this was the rationale for eliminating adult basic education, or free adult basic education in our province. Joe.
So our campaign is Don't Close the Doors, and it is one developed by students around this country, or around the province, to fight for we're only asking for one thing. It's just to reinstate the funding that was cut back in January so that folks can attend adult basic education and not have to pay tuition fees. We're using an online platform to engage with members and to put pressure on government. So we have a petition. It's gotten over 7,000 signatures since it launched. And we've also been going around and doing these presentations to other city councils and other coalition partners to kind of gain support and to show government that this is something that the citizens in British Columbia value as important.
So just a quick note, we've received lots of testimonials from citizens around the province around how adult basic education has changed their lives and opened doors. I myself am a good example. I became a single parent in 2001, didn't have a high school degree, went back to school, upgraded, moved on to a bachelor's degree. And so for me, I really do understand the value of the program. And I have to say, had I been required to pay $320 per course, that opportunity may not have opened itself to me. I certainly pay a lot more in taxes now because of my education. And then just a quick note, so we're here today essentially to ask the City Council to provide an endorsement to the campaign. Here's a list of some of our endorsements at large. So we have the University of Victoria Student Society, the BC Teachers Federation, we have First Call, BC Child and Youth Care Coalition, and the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition. We've also done 3 presentations to city councils before this. So we've been to the City of Victoria and had a unanimous endorsement from that city council. We've been to the City of New Westminster, received a unanimous endorsement from that city council, and we've also been to the City of Burnaby, also received a unanimous endorsement of the campaign. So for us to add the voice of municipalities, people who represent citizens directly in our province, goes a long way to showing the BC government that there's a real value in providing free access to K-12 courses through whatever system, the post-secondary system or the K-12 system. And for us, it would be very meaningful if the City of Duncan would join our call and ask the BC government to provide the very minimal funding to make this possible again.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. It's very appreciated. I'll take questions from council. Councilor Staples.
Thank you. I would just actually like to move the endorsement. There's absolutely no reason I could imagine not supporting this.
Okay, appreciate that. Is there any, it's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion, further discussion at all from council? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to call a question on the motion here. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Janelle and Patrick. So we'll move to our second delegation, which is the President of Chamber of Commerce, Julie Skur. Welcome very much. How are you this evening? Yes.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Yeah.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Julie Skur. I'm the president of the Duncan Cowichan Chamber of Commerce, as well as the director of finance and operations up at Queen Margaret School. With me today is Sonia Nagel, our executive director of the chamber, Moira Hoke from Coastal Community Credit Union, who is our first vice president, and my lovely daughter, Katie, who's just come home for Christmas.
Great. Come to watch your mom. Great.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to council. We're hoping to include presentations like this one at minimum once a year to you as our municipal partners to ensure you're updated on the many successes of the Cowichan Regional Visitor Center. It also provides us an opportunity to show accountability for the funds that we receive yearly from the City of Duncan. I'd like to take this time to recognize our city liaison on the chamber board, John Horgan. We're delighted to have John contribute to our board discussions and take information from us back to the city. Thank you, Councillor Horgan.
You're welcome.
First, let me thank you for the grant funding for the 2015 year. This made a significant impact on our operations, contributing to the success that we've had in our new location, where mortgage payments have replaced the rent payments we had in our former location. Being an owner, opposed to a tenant, also comes with a myriad of additional maintenance and building expenses, which has had a significant impact on our operational budget. Last month, we celebrated 2 years in our new building at the Cowichan Regional Visitor Center. This building houses both our chamber offices and the visitor services operations. This past year, the paving and parking lot lighting was completed. The last remaining part of the project completion is signage for both the Visitor Center and the BC Forest Discovery Center on the northwest corner of the lot. Some statistics to note. Year to date, we are up 120% for the number of visitors served over our old location. By the end of 2015, we expect to service over 21,000 visitors. We remain open during the Christmas Express, resulting in additional retail sales and a chance for the local community to see the interior of the visitor center and explore the 9 themed interpretive displays. I tell any of the locals that come in who haven't been in before that I guarantee they will learn at least one new thing about our valley that they didn't know before. Although we've moved a bit north of the city, Duncan remains one of the main key attractions for our visitors. This year alone, to date, we have referred over 10,000 visitors to downtown Duncan, to the totem tours and First Nation experiences. We've received 28 buses to the visitor center, compared to 5 buses in our old location, a testament to the more accessible entrance and parking lot. 72% of our visitors are from Canada, and 15% of our visitors originate in Europe, showing that Vancouver Island continues to be a strong tourist destination for Europeans. 27% of our visitors are spending 1 to 3 nights in the community, while 10% are staying more than 1 week. That's almost 40% of our visitors who overnight in the Cowichan Valley, spending money on accommodations, attractions, camping, gas, food, etc. And interestingly enough, 25% of the visitors we serve are asking for maps and directions, obviously information they are not able to secure online. As you know, many have suggested that brick and mortar visitor centers will show a decline in visitors due to the digital age, where visitors can research and book their travel arrangements online. Our numbers show a totally different story, and we see this trend continuing. Visitors who stop at the CRVC want a personal connection, which gives us the opportunity to encourage them to spend more time in the valley. Our professional travel counselors' main goal is to keep visitors in the area longer. These visitors are positively impacting and contributing to the economy of the region. This year we branched out by providing community outreach via our mobile visitor services. Funding of $6,700 was sought and received through a one-time pilot project from Destination BC. We served an additional 2,000 visitors by attending events such as Sunfest, Duncan's Farmers Market, Cowichan Bay Dragon Boat Festival, etc., including orientation days at both Brentwood College School and Queen Margaret School. We have applied for funding in this upcoming year to continue these mobile outreach services. We generated new revenue in the visitor center through racking fees, poster rentals, display case rentals, banner advertising, and advertising in relocation packages. As well, our referral and commission fee programs have resulted in additional revenues through summer bookings. We've also expanded our retail and consignment product lines featuring unique local products. And you may have heard that we're selling firewood permits, resulting in a profit of over $1,200 for September and October alone. Last year's financial results also speak to our successes. For the year ended 31st of August, we show a positive variance over our projected budget. Funds from local governments contributed, as well as the pilot project funds from Destination BC, and an increase in other revenues, including a substantial increase in the chamber membership dues. Tight control over expenses will help to better the bottom line. All combined, this allowed us a break-even year. This year's budget once again shows a very cost-conscious approach. While the chamber is still subsidizing the visitor center operations, the expanded revenue sources have helped offset this subsidy somewhat. Staffing continues to be our key challenge in operating the new facility. While we have a great pool of volunteers, we run the visitor center with 1 full-time year-round staff member and 1 summer student. We have not been able to obtain Service Canada's summer student funding. This results in a huge reliance on our volunteers, and at times is a drain on our chamber staff, whom have had to step in and help out on busy days when the center often sees over 200 visitors. We have secured stable funding commitment from Destination BC, $12,500 for 2016, 17, and 18. While this commitment gives stability for the next 3 years, the amount has not changed since 2012 and reflects the visitor numbers from our old location. We were caught in the transition of moving to a new funding program which does not consider performance-based information. We are, however, hopeful that we will secure additional funding, as noted earlier, through the new innovation funding program, similar to this year's pilot project. I also wanted to share some good news from the Chamber side of our operations. We have doubled our membership in 3 years and now boast 454 members. We recently recognized 57 of our long-term Chamber members of 20 and 25 plus years of membership. Our upcoming 2016 Black Tie Award ceremony will celebrate 20 years of recognizing business excellence and volunteerism in our community. We were hoping to be able to announce our 2016 Lifetime Achievement recipient, but have been asked by the recipient to wait until they're back from holidays. We will send you an early media release because you will be familiar with this person and their contribution to the community. Our All Candidates Forum for the recent federal election was well organized and appreciated by the candidates and the 510 people in the audience. Our recent sold-out business showcase celebrated Small Business Week and featured a business walk for our municipal partners. We have a new rack card outlining the 5 benefits of joining the Chamber. Thank you for including it in your racks downstairs, and we hope you'll consider including it in your business license renewal notices next year. And finally, we are so proud of our Communications Award announced at the recent BC Chamber Executives Conference. This award recognizes the communication we have with our members. In closing, this is a very exciting time for the Chamber. We are the voice of business in the Cowichan Valley, and the Visitor Center is generating both positive economic benefit for our businesses here. Thank you for your support of our operations, and we look forward to the coming year and next year's reporting of more success. I want to take this time just to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, good health, happiness, and prosperity in the new year. I could take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you very much, Mr. You know, it's well noted the achievements that, especially over the last number of years, the growth in the Chamber is significant. That's quite a piece of success.
Yes,
and
yes.
I congratulate you on all your work and the board for that work.
Thank you very much.
It's obviously the services and the things that you're doing for the members is obviously being recognized as beneficial, and
Yeah.
so I think that's very important.
Yeah, thank you.
So does any of council would like to ask a question? Councillor Horton, and I will come back to a question with respect to Destination BC.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not going to. We get this working. I wasn't going to ask a question. I'm just going to make a statement that I think we should all take a good look at, or a good listen to the numbers that we received tonight, the benefits of where we put our money, and think of this as a positive move for the City of Duncan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. I was present at the press conference with respect to Destination BC and the 3-year stable funding. That wasn't exactly what we were all hoping to hear, but I was standing behind the minister at the time and did get an opportunity to make a comment with respect to that and the impact that it had on this. So at that time was said that the new pilot program was innovative and that they would be bringing that forward. I think we will, I certainly will personally, and hopefully council, support providing more performance-based funding again in the future, and when they have pilot programs that are successful, that they follow up with some funding to make sure that that can continue.
Yeah, we're going to be we're applying again. I think the deadline is imminent. So we'll be, hopefully we'll be, if we're accepted, we'll be offering that service again this year. I know that the minister did suggest, and we are following up on it, about writing another letter to them, to Destination BC, regarding the performance-based funding, because it really is a shame that we got caught right at that transition point, where we moved from our old location where our numbers were lower to our new location, and yet we're still, you know, it's great to have the stable commitment, which is really good. It helps us budget, obviously, but
yes,
it would also be nice if it was based on our numbers of this
yes,
year, last year,
okay,
rather than 3 years ago.
Well, thank you very much for your service to the community and your volunteerism through the chamber, and have a very, very Merry Christmas
Yes,
to
and
all
you
of
as
you
well.
and yours and your daughter.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome to Council Chambers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we have one last delegation this evening, and that's Amanda Marchman. And I don't see Chris Hall here this evening. You're on your own tonight, I take it?
am.
Okay.
Decided to go on a vacation.
Oh, well, good. And you're going to be presenting on this annual report for Social Planning Council. And I have seen the presentation a few times before, but I'll be just as attentive for this one.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Marchand, and I first got active with Social Planning Council when I joined the Walk of Nations Organizing Committee. And Chris sends along his regrets, sorry he can't be here tonight. So, let's see if we get online here. Here we are. All right.
Close the box first, the little green box.
Okay. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to take you through some of the highlights of the work that Social Planning Council has been engaged in. Since 2006, Social Planning Council has been really working on affordable housing issues. And after years of nurturing its growth, we're happy to say that it has its own organization. There we go. So another piece that we work at Social Planning Council is the living wage. We use a range of research and work with community partners to arrive to an understanding about what a living wage looks like in the Cowichan Valley. And in 2015, the living wage was $17.55, which was an increase from $17.04 in 2014. Here you can see what kind of demographic profile and scenario that we utilize to create a living wage. And hopefully you have some of this information in a package as well. Since 2008, Social Planning Council has been working to support cultural connections between individuals, organizations, and governments. And here are some of the highlights about what we've been up to. Understanding the village. The City of Duncan's taken a leadership role by making this opportunity available to its city staff, which we really are thankful for. I've also taken this workshop, and I think there are a couple people in here have as well. And it has been an incredible experience for those who've taken it. I know personally it's really changed my perception of the community. In the past 2 years, we've put 3,500 people through this workshop process, including students, thanks to the facilitation efforts of the school district. We now have all of our dates booked with the schools throughout 2016. And starting February 19th, we'll be doing our community workshops. And also again in the fall. So we really hope that if you haven't joined it yet, that you'll get on board and come and check out this amazing experience. Cultural connections, what arose from the Understanding the Village workshop was something called Cowichan 101. This started over a year ago at the Salmon Big House. And participants who've been a part of this program have been on an amazing array of experiences, including spearfishing, canoeing, learning a little bit about language, some of the complexities of protocol, plant identification, traditional uses of plants, learning about the land and stories, and so much more. And then, of course, it's also the Walk of Nations. So we had our 7th annual Walk of Nations, where we experienced a really beautiful coming together, people walking, singing, chanting together for understanding, acceptance, respect, and compassion. And a really neat addition to this year's walk, which has not been done in the past, is a whole extra day in advance of the main day, the public day, with youth. We had 4 grade 7 classes from 4 different schools come to Centennial Park on buses, and they spent the whole day working together out of their kind of traditional homeschool groups, working together, doing cultural events and activities. And what's really, I think, I worked there, I was working at the Cobb Kitchen, we were making pizza, but there's so much laughter and so much connection there. It was really amazing. But I think what was neat was that with the new changes with the school district, some of these students, you can really tell the difference between the schools. There's some that are predominantly First Nations, some that aren't. And there's a bit of a cultural divide. So getting these kids out for one whole day, working together, getting active, means that when they hit the halls in grade 8, there's some recognition, there's some experiences together, and we hope that will go some ways in terms of breaking down that cultural barrier. There we go. So another piece that social planning does is research. Our latest research report, Benefiting Community, the Economic and Social Impacts of the Voluntary Sector in the Cowichan region, indicates that nonprofits have had a huge impact of $119 million per year in revenue, as well as over 1,800 jobs, in addition to all the compounding efforts, benefits socially for the community. So this year we'll be diving in a little bit deeper, looking at these numbers, and really examining how these organizations support the region and the benefits that they bring to the community. So what are our focus areas for 2016? Or in other words, how can we make our community a better place? Well, since May, we sent out facilitation teams and reached out to hundreds of people from a wide variety of backgrounds and demographic profile, and we've been getting perspectives about community. And the idea is by combining this qualitative research up with research data, we'll be providing a picture of the priorities in our community. I personally got to talk to over 70 seniors, 7 years and older, and ask them a lot of questions. We led with 2 questions, which is what do you value most about your community and what concerns you most about your community? And as you can imagine, we had some awesome responses. So as we prepare for social policy, we'll be looking at the vision we created for ourselves. 2020 is only 4 years away, and it's time for us to revisit our goals and see how much we've achieved as we look forward to the next 20 years. Now, some of you have already registered for the event on January 28th, and that's where we're going to review what we've gathered and take some next steps. So what we can look forward to in 2016. We'll continue our work with Cultural Connections and continue on with an 8th annual Walk of Nations and additional Understanding the Village workshops for both the community and in schools. These new initiatives will see us bring elders and community members together to discuss a regional reconciliation framework. And we'll also be establishing a reconciliation and action team where we're going to localize the TRC recommendations for reconciliation. We are also going to continue to develop cultural connection workshops and opportunities. And we're going to document reconciliation activities that are already in the region and happening to tell the story about where we've come from, how we've come together, and what we've learned, and what it means to us. We're going to be developing some social innovations regarding settler and First Nations programs, including projects and business models. And we're also going to pilot the Cultural Connections. So we're going to take the Cultural Connections pilot and work it into other communities that want to have it. That's the Sharing Our Story program. Oh, I went ahead, sorry. Climate change. In 2016, we will continue to work as a member of the Climate Change Collaborative. We'll be doing research, education, outreach, neighborhood pilot projects, and the development of a social climate adaptation policy toolkit. And there's been some work done to understand regional poverty, and mainly focusing on issues of housing and childcare. But there's not been enough research done, or any research done looking at what's the extent and impact of that poverty. And as you're probably aware of the report that came out in November, areas within the CVRD were identified as having some of the highest rates of child poverty, including Lake Cowichan and Duncan. So this is understandably a priority for us this year, and we're going to continue to seek funding to do this vital work for the health and well-being of the children in the community. So that's just a little bit about what we've been up to and a little bit about who we are. So thank you so much for your time. Okay. And yeah, okay. It's a little bit about our board of directors and our government liaisons and who's who.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. So are there any questions or comments for Amanda with respect to the presentation? Hearing none, thank you so much. Oh, Councillor Duncan, I didn't see your hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. The living wage, how does that compare to the Lower Mainland? Because I remember their living wage was like 17 and change 5 years ago. So, you know, where is theirs now compared to, are we catching up fast, unfortunately, or?
That's a great question, and if Chris was here, he would definitely have the answers. Unfortunately, hasn't been my focus, I don't know. But I will find out and get back to you what it is. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
Just to add to that question, so that's assuming that two parents are both making a minimum of $17.55?
That's correct.
So
Yep.
it's like more like
per
$35.
That's right. Yep. The model, there's some assumptions in the model. It includes 2 children, 1 in childcare, 2 parents, 2 vehicles, that kind of thing. So it's just make some assumptions to come to that.
Now, when you get
Number.
into the, I think there was a portion of the presentation earlier
Yeah.
that got into detail, showed the list of things that were included
Exactly.
in it. You didn't present it tonight, but
Yeah.
that detail was there, and
Yeah.
everything that was included.
That report, obviously there's a paper report. Do we have a copy of that?
Of the living wage?
The present.
Oh, we have a link.
Yeah.
Links and list.
And the links on your agenda, so there's more information, there's more detail in it.
paste, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause it
Oh, I see it. Okay, all right. It's not actually a link. It's just a. Yeah. Okay, I can get it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Our first presentation was about 20 minutes. We had to cut a bunch out, but thank you for those who can take the time to go and have a look and
Yeah.
get the details. Thank you.
And Vancouver's is $20.68 an hour. I just looked it up for 2015.
Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
And have a very Merry Christmas and great holiday.
Have a good trip to Vancouver.
Okay, so we'll move on to report of the Chief Administrative Officer, and I think he distributed that at the beginning of the meeting. Mr. Divertai, if you'd like to just go through the highlights.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just touch on a few of them. Residential water metering is approximately 60% complete in the Eagle Heights area of the water system. Staff recommendation to award Phase 2 of the water metering project to Corix, and that Phase 2 is in the City of Duncan section of the water system. That'll be coming forward to the January Committee of the Whole meeting. Skipping down, just wanted to mention that we have received a development permit amendment for the 15 Canada Avenue development, although we've only recently received it, so we didn't get it in time for us to put together a report for the January Committee of the Whole meeting, so it will be going forward to the February Committee of the Whole meeting. Just an update on the animal control bylaw that staff recently met with the representatives from Coastal Animal Control, Couch and Cat Rescue, to discuss possible amendments to the city's bylaw banning the feeding of ownerless cats. The meeting was very constructive, and staff should have a draft bylaw amendment for council's consideration at the January 4th Committee of the Whole meeting to address that concern. And lastly, 2016 budget deliberations. We have had discussions and meetings on Friday, November 20th and Monday, November 30th. The draft 5-year financial plan will be coming to the Committee of the Whole on the January 4th meeting and will be available online by this Thursday, as it's the holiday season, so we'll be getting it out a little bit early due to office closures. The public is encouraged to attend that January 4th committee meeting or provide feedback by email from reading the material online. And we will be having a budget open house on January 18th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. prior to the regular council meeting.
Okay, thank you. So any questions we'll just reserve for the question period, council or otherwise? Okay, so we move on to reports of staff, and we've got item 7.1, which is a development variance permit for 162 2nd Street to vary the setbacks for the building and parking, and the motion is in front of you.
So moved.
And would staff like to report to it? Maybe Mr. Mazzoni, would you like to speak to it?
Okay, testing. There we go. I'm going to move up a little bit closer here, and then I'm going to sort of go back and forth just because my notes are at the table and pictures are all up here. So, and I don't have my glasses, so it's hard for me to see. So we've got the subject property. Okay, so we have the subject property here. It's in the RM3 zone, and it's got a laneway behind the house. And
Excuse me, could you hold your microphone up to your face?
Laneway behind the house, and the location of the suite would be right in here. I'll just move this forward. Okay, that's the picture of the house. This is the back part of the house. This is the laneway behind the house. And this is the site. I'll just go through some of the recommendations from staff, as well as some of the issues with the with design guidelines, as well as the variance. The recommendation is the council approve the development variance permit for the proposed development for a detached two-story building with a second-floor dwelling unit. There's a number of variances that are required. The application is a little bit of a square peg and a round hole for staff to deal with, because the zoning bylaw was not, the RM3 zone was not made for this kind of development, and the development permit guidelines were not made for this kind of development either, for the design guidelines. So what we're working toward, the new zoning bylaw, is to have better parameters and better guidelines, so there aren't as many variances going into the future. Some of the setback variances include the rear setback from 7.5 meters to 1 meter for the proposed building, to vary the interior east side setback from 3 meters to 1.9, and to vary the interior west side setback from 3 meters to 1.6 meters for the existing building. There's also a parking variance, as council can see, to vary section 4.5 of the off-street parking and loading bylaw to permit parking spaces for the proposed development to gain access from the highway. So I'll just see if there's any more on this one here. So that's the proposed building with this suite on the top of the garage. There's 2 units in the suite. It's a fairly simple building. There was not a lot of design options for it. And I'll talk about what the design review panel and the recommendations they made when we start talking about the development permit. I think that's the last one. So, as I said before, the zoning bylaw doesn't really, it's dated, and it doesn't really address suites like this on a garage with a lane attachment and or access to suites from a rear lane. And the official community plan does not really address it in terms of its design guidelines. So we have a bit of an animal here that's not addressed in policy very well, which we would hope to address in the future, because there are not a lot of lanes in Duncan, but there are a few, and we want to be able to make this kind of development as attractive and as functional as possible moving forward.
Okay,
move the
so,
recommendation.
there's a mover, is there a seconder for it? Okay, seconded. And discussion on the motion? Okay. Councillor Bruce?
This was sent back to the advisory board, was it? Did they make any changes? Because it looks pretty much the same as what we saw last time.
Yeah, they approved it, the design review panel. They approved what was submitted, but they had a number of recommendations for council.
Mm-hmm. But the recommendations weren't specific to this application.
No, not
They were-
specific to the building. They
they
were
were-
specific to policy that
Yeah.
needed to make, where you needed to address change in the future.
Okay. That answers your question, Councillor Bruce? Okay. I do have a comment on it. I'm supportive of this kind of development. I find the vacuum in policy a little bit difficult, and I'm going to find myself not likely approving these amount of setbacks to allow this kind of use, which was, I think, brought forward quite specifically to be able to legalize a use already taking place on the property with respect to secondary suite, which is not allowed in RM3 and RM4. And it may not be an issue that's clear for councils that has not been here, but we went through a process of rezoning and making amendments to the zone in RM3 and RM4 to prevent the expansion of single-family dwellings into either allowing the secondary suites or allowing some other modified kind of development to meet the zoning because it wasn't actually reaching the potential or the highest and best use of a RM3 and RM4 zone. So as attractive as I am attracted by laneway housing, we do have a limited amount of lanes. With that lack of policy and the potential for a number of single-family homes to entrench the use with a laneway house or other type of laneway housing or secondary suites, in simply, I don't believe is achieving our community plan view, and I'm a little reluctant to support it without us. We have a community plan review coming along, and I think that there could be a place for this kind of development. It can offer some affordability for housing and rental housing and support people in properties. But I think that we really need to consider it because, of course, we have limited areas in the city for that RM3 and 4 zone. And I think this could be a challenge if this, in some ways, almost sets a precedent without us fully considering the policy questions with respect to how this is going to be done. The other issue I have with it is with respect of the entry from the garage on the main floor with a 1 meter setback, if I'm correct, backing out onto a lane. I think that's a challenge because there's the visibility issue for backing out of an enclosed garage. You don't see much in the way of windows, and I appreciate for where the location is that there wouldn't be any windows in the garage, but there are none on the first floor, which doesn't provide any visibility for the person backing out into the laneway. So for those reasons, I'm not going to be able to support the variance at this time. I'd like to see us take some active effort in updating our zoning bylaws and getting into that review of the community plan so we can review this form of housing, because I think if it were to carry on in other areas, we're going to be dealing with substantial variances if others applied, and it's going to be a challenge without having that input from community and the neighborhoods and looking at our community plan and whether this is a way of achieving those goals. Councillor Jackson.
I'm going to vote in favor of this just because of where it is. It is kind of like we talked about at our last meeting, sort of a transition block between the more residential and between the commercial. I believe they can get around the visibility by doing like what they did on Jubilee Street and White Road by getting those big convex mirrors or something like that. That doesn't bother me. The fact that it was sent to the advisory design panel, they had a discussion about it. They said it was okay given that it's small size, and then they recommended that we should be doing some work about our own rules and regulations, that in fact the failure is ours. So I don't necessarily want to hold up this development. I think that because, I mean, if this were a big giant building, absolutely not. The fact is it's a very small building. It's going to be tucked in behind a house and not visible from 2nd Street. I think it'll be just fine, so I'm going to be voting in favor of it.
Okay. Any further discussion? Councillor Horde.
Yeah, I find it very interesting that we sent this back to the design panel and they came up with no suggestions whatsoever to improve the look of the thing. I think that I said last time when we looked at it that, you know, it's a garage with a suite on the top. There's not much you can do with it. You can't put lipstick on a pig and make it into something it's not. You can do whatever you like with the building. It's still going to be a box with a suite on the top. For backing out onto the laneway, I don't think that you could make much difference there. I don't think you could make any safer or any unsafer than it already is. I just find it odd. I found it very odd that we would send it back to the design panel when we did, because I couldn't see that there's much they could do with, you know, shaping a box to make it more aesthetically pleasing. I think the mayor did state that we could put a garden on top of the roof to make it more acceptable, but I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. I think that what you see is what you get. It's just a garage with a suite on the top, and I don't think you're going to make much make it a palace. I think that's what you're going to get. So I'd vote in favour of it.
Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I also support the development. I think that, we're looking at densification in the city generally, and because we haven't gone around to changing our zoning bylaws, I don't really think we should penalize this person who's trying to do this. As for backing in and out, well, back into the garage, and then you drive straight out. Solves the problem with the mirror.
Councillor Staples?
One of the things, sitting on the design panel committee as an observer, really more than anything else, one of the things that we talked a lot about was the fact that we're not going to get all of a sudden 100 applications for something identical to this in terms of the structure. And that was, listening to like a design perspective from that really helped me get my head around it in a different way. Because it's true, not everyone is going to want that on the street. So we're not going to end up with 16, box-like buildings on those alleyways. And they talked a lot about what they've done in Vancouver for alleyways, and that really, as Councillor Jackson was saying, it's really falling on us because we haven't prepared our zoning for this this transition area. And going down in those areas, there's already old structures identical to this. Not in terms of structure, but in terms of being right on the laneway. There's one that obviously isn't used anymore, or there's a couple of them. So it's something that has been done in the past already. So I think there already is a precedent set for that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give one last comment hearing the discussion. My objection with respect to this isn't so much with the fact that I don't like laneway housing. In fact, I toured a lot of the laneway housing in Vancouver and seen what it is, but it was done on purpose through policy with an R1 zone in Vancouver. So those are single-family residential zones that allowed laneway housing. Now, the orientation of the laneway housing to the alley is very important to the livability of those suites and those secondary housing units that they do in it, and it's been executed quite nicely in some areas, not so well in other areas. But there was a point made with respect to the fact that we somehow failed in our zoning. Well, we didn't. We very purposely zoned those areas RM3, so it's not an issue of whether the person can have density. In fact, we're seeing the result of the RM3 zone with the developments that have taken place on Jubilee Street, which are exactly that, zoned RM3. I mean, I've gone from single-family use to a multi-family use, which has had 6 or 8 suites or whatever, and those have all been done. And that's what could be done on this property or any combination of properties on 2nd Street. So it's not about the disallowance of higher density, it's the type, and I think because there's a vacuum in this, I can't support it this time. I'd like us to see us fill that policy vacuum, and if we're going to have laneway housing opportunities, that laneway housing would be very attractive and make it an enhancement as opposed to simply allowing these variances to make it work. So with that, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? And the motion carries. Okay. So we move on to item 7.2, and this is with respect to the same development permit for 162 2nd Street, and the motion is applicable because it did not, it passed the variance, so the motion is before you, and if there's a mover?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, this is with respect to the look and the design, essentially, so. Okay, any discussion or questions? Hearing none, then all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We move to item 7.3, and this is the Code of Conduct Policy, and the Council endorsed the informal, semi-formal, and formal resolutions processes outlined in Section 8.1 of the Code of Conduct Policy, and that other clarifying amendments as attached to December 21st, 2015 report by the Director of Corporate Services, and that the policy as amended be adopted. Moved, and a seconder. Any discussion? Councillor Jackson.
On the revised code of conduct with the staff report, it says, once council has considered the matter, I think I'm on page 2 of 3.
Can you give us the agenda page?
This is the revised code of conduct staff report, page 2. And it talks about, once council has considered the matter, they may resolve to dismiss the complaint, censure the council member, require the council member to apologize. And I'm saying maybe it should be request, not require. Because frankly speaking, you can require me to apologize to somebody all I want, but if I don't feel like I've done anything wrong, your requirement isn't going to do anything for me, but if you request that I do, then I probably would. I just don't like that word very much, because you're demanding that I do something that I very well may not do. But if you ask me nicely, I probably will.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? That would require an amendment.
Yes,
If you
so
wanted to have it
but I
changed,
wanted,
so I
if
was,
somebody else wanted to speak to
have other
that.
discussion.
Well-
Requiring an amendment.
I'm requesting an amendment, but if other people totally objected to what I just said, then I wasn't going to.
Well, we're all very friendly here, so
Oh, I know.
objection
I
probably
know.
wouldn't be the case, but
Okay.
discussion might be. Councillor Staples?
I support your request.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
so then I would
like-
ask to have that moved as an amendment.
Okay, I would like to move as an amendment that the word where it says require the council member to apologize to any person affected, that be changed to request that the council member
Okay, and there's a seconder for
apologize.
that.
I will second that because I agree. If you just demand that I apologize to someone, I may do it, but I may not mean it. But if you're requesting, I'll give it more
I
consideration.
may burst out laughing.
I feel like it's very nice if it's not meant anyway. Sorry. Sorry,
Thank you.
Sharon.
Councillor Horgan.
Yeah, having witnessed councillors' reaction to this document last year, I don't think it matters what you put in there. If the councillors decide they're not going to agree with what's been said or done, it doesn't matter what you put in this agreement, they're not going to do it anyway. So I would agree with Councillor Jackson. She can put in whatever she likes because
Okay.
probably everybody would do exactly what they want to do anyway. So
Okay,
you can
so
write
we're-
down whatever you like.
Thanks, Debbie.
So we're speaking on the amendment, which is to change one word, and that's been moved and seconded. Any more discussion on the amendment,
Oh,
please?
Yes, just a question
Okay.
for clarification. These aren't just for council, this is for staff as well, right? Like, this is the code of conduct policy. Am I,
There's sections of it that apply to all, there's sections that apply to just council, there's sections that apply to, that apply to just staff. So it depends on which section you're referring to. So
Okay.
the document applies to all.
Let's just hold the staff accountable.
okay,
Could
no,
I-
I'm good, yeah. That's good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to recognize Councillor Staples. Did you want to make further
So,
comment
so
before I call the
the
question?
so the amendment. There's also another one, but I don't know if I should do it now because we're just voting on Councillor Jackson's amendment, correct? And then we'll go back to the original motion.
Correct.
Okay,
As
so
amended.
as amended.
Or not.
Okay, so I shouldn't suggest another amendment at this point in time?
Technically, that wouldn't be because it was moved and seconded as it
Okay.
was stated, so it'd be probably best to dispose of this resolution or the amendment and then go on from there,
Okay, thank you.
okay? So I'm going to call the question on the amendment then. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we move to the main motion as amended. But then they can propose another amendment. Okay?
I have a question, I guess.
Okay.
So my question would be, and this is in the draft final.
Okay, Councillor
This
Staples?
is in the. I was just
think
making sure
Ms.
everything was
Robertson,
okay with
she's
that.
might be asking a question of you, so.
So on page 3 of 20, 2.5, when making decisions, council staff and committee members should consider all relevant facts, opinions, and analysis of which they should be reasonably aware. I'm just not sure why the must was changed to should, because to me we really should consider all relevant, like that's part of what we're expected to do. So I'm not sure why that was changed. So it's page 3 of the Code of Conduct Policy Draft Final, page 3 of 20, 2.5. I'm just asking why it was changed from must to should.
I could probably best speak to that. That came about through a lot of the amendments that were more staff section related. This one happens to cover off all council, committee, and staff. One of the points that was asked for clarification on is must applied as quite a, in some of the staff's mind, quite a high bar perhaps as to whether they must consider, and consider to them being maybe a little bit stronger than what others might consider to be considered. I'm not sure if I'm speaking in tongue almost at the moment.
I
but
get it.
They felt that it, and I don't want to give an example, or I don't really have one off the top of my head for one that sort of caused them some concern. But rather than there being, I guess, an expectation that they need to make sure that they've considered everything possible, as opposed to maybe certain things are relatively benign, and someone could point a finger towards that and say, you didn't consider that one, and or you missed that one that you should have considered. That's why it was changed to should as opposed to must. And so if that bothers you, I'm sure we could.
I think it was the other way around. You must consider not.
It was originally must.
Yeah.
Okay, was. So it's gone to should.
I guess what concerns me about it is that then the opposite could happen too, right? And so as a council person, I could say, well, I don't have to consider everything. I mean, it says right here.
Absolutely. One of the other thing regarding the whole document is there's a lot of intent behind it, and you look at the first off portions of it, and you could get caught up under whether there's whether something's a perceived conflict or an actual conflict, and there's some work on trying to tidy up some of that language just so that the expectation isn't there. But in the principles section, for example, there's a lot of soft and I'll call them fuzzy wording in the beginning to provide that sort of intent and basis behind it, whereas after that you get into more specifics. But still at that particular section there was some comfort level provided by the word should versus must. So.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't support the changes. I've gone through the process. I don't believe it works. I don't believe we're walking the talk. It should be consistent between us and our staff. We should be all treated the same way. And so I'll be voting against it because I don't see that it has any teeth, and I don't see that the changes are going to make it any different.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
My question was similar to Councillor Staples in the conflict of interest. Says they're free from undue influence not to act, and then or appear to act was taken out. And that was sort of my same comment is it's sort of it is semantics because for instance when we're talking with, I'll pick on you, Councillor Bruce, about that, whether you're in conflict of interest or not in that situation, but it was more about
Could you use your microphone too, please?
oh sure, it was more about whether you appeared to be because of the relationship, not whether like legally there was some technicalities around it. But I think it's for the public trust, if you look at the top one where it talks about you know, and if you look at the first one, code of conduct, and it talks about there was one here that be cognizant of appearances and strive to conduct himself in a way that upholds and increases the public trust. So then if you go back in this one, this directly relates with if you're an appearance to be, it still reduces chances of losing public trust. So I'm wondering if we should keep the appearance in there because again, the semantics. Legally, it's up to the councillor whether they decide or not whether it's a conflict of interest, was my understanding is legally they get to decide. So if we just leave it to the legalities, people might be a little bit more wishy-washy.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? So those were just questions at this point. Was there enough clarity with respect, or would you like clarity from staff on that?
Well, may I, Your Worship, on that one, rather than it being or appear to be influenced, for example, or appear to act, there was an additional clause to provide some additional clarity on what that is intended to be. Because you can do your utmost to appear to act in a certain fashion, and someone, best efforts, someone sees one bit of that information and jumps to conclusions. So rather than it being appear to act, because it depends on whose perspective you're looking at as to what the appearance is. So, you know, if you're making your best efforts to avoid those appearances, then I think you're meeting that spirit.
And that would likely also meet the test of common law as well. And I think that is, under the Acts, is fairly clearly stated that way. Okay, no further discussion, and so on the motion as amended, all those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. We move to item 7.4, which is the building statistics report for November 15th, and a motion to receive information. Okay, moved. Seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item 7.5, this is with respect to the Canada Avenue flood pump station and pump supply purchase, and the motion is that council support the municipality of North Council entering into a purchase agreement with Sands Babcock for the purchase of 2 Archimedes screw pumps for the Canada Avenue flood pump station in the amount of $682,767 plus GST.
So moved. Second.
Seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is the price for the 2 pumps? Okay. And this is for the station where they were talking about wanting to put an extra 500 grand into the ground to stabilize it? Yeah?
Yes.
Is that a yes? Yeah.
It's going to require lots of stabilizing for that. So you've seen some of the soils they've placed just north of the tattoo parlor there, so that's the area in question along the highway.
So again, I'm questioning as to why we spend $500,000 to prevent liquefaction in that area if we're in such a scenario where there's liquefaction occurring here, it's not going to matter whether we spend 500 grand trying to stabilize that pump because we're all going to be underwater.
Thank you. Councillor Staples.
Yes, it could be.
Excuse me.
It could
this
be
is a regular
terrible.
council meeting, so I would just ask for the proper recognition of those who've got the table. Councillor Jackson is.
What if it's less than terrible? What if it's less than catastrophic? Yes, if it is catastrophic, I won't be here, my house won't be here. But if it's less than catastrophic and the dikes hold and we do need a pump, then this will work, which is why I'm going to be voting for it, because I am counting on the fact that in my lifetime, it's going to be less than catastrophic.
I believe I had Councillor Horgan next. Councillor Staples, did you? Yes,
Thank you. Yeah, I'm getting a little confused on this whole thing. This is all around the Beverly Corners area, right? Is that what we're talking about?
Further north.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is where it's gone from 300,000 to 500,000 to 900,000, and now we got the pumps.
No.
Exactly.
No, am I getting confused here with the amounts?
This is in line with the approval that council gave essentially in July, if I recall, that said we could, in partnership with North Couch, go forward, order the Sands Babcock pumps, subject to coming back to both councils for final approval of the actual purchase once the actual dollars were awarded. The additional costs we're seeing that I believe Councillor Duncan was referring to around the costs of piles versus deep soil mixing versus all the other costs of the flood walls and whatnot that we're seeing because the soils are so poor in this area is actually separate from this particular decision in of itself. This is strictly for the pumps themselves, not the ultimate cost of the project, not actually referring to what Councillor Duncan is actually.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know I missed the meeting while I was away, and I didn't know whether one was linked to the other, or this is.
Well, they're definitely related.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The pumps are required, were required, or would be required, irrespective of the soil conditions, to stabilize the pump house itself.
So have we agreed to?
We had agreed
spend more money for the.
Not for these pumps, but for it's in budget deliberations with respect to the additional costs, requests for the project with respect to soil conditions.
Okay. Council at this time is only committed to what you had previously agreed as of July of this year.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I may, since we've talked about seismic conditions, is just for clarity, the pump station itself and the flood walls would be built to that seismic standard. Because of the liquefaction aspect of things, the dikes themselves may settle during an earthquake. Because they can be easily, or not easily, but relatively easily topped back up with material, and the odds of that happening at the same time as a full-out flood, there's that ability to top it back up to the 1 in 200. If you have a seismic event, you can't quickly reconstruct the pump station and the building, so that's why it's built to the full seismic standard.
Engineered standard, correct. Okay. So has everybody got clarity on what we're talking about? So this is with respect to the purchase of the pump, the mechanical pumps themselves. Councillor Staples.
I just have a question. Is it possible at some point, I remember Clay came here a couple of years ago, and maybe 3 years ago, when all this work sort of started with the diking, and sort of gave us an overview of everything that was happening. It would be great to have some sort of an updated version of that for everyone to see, because as it has grown, it's become more complex, and there's running into different issues, and so it would be good to kind of have that full picture again.
We had attempted to have North Cowichan staff come to our budget deliberations, but they couldn't make that particular meeting. So what we can do is ask them to come to a future committee meeting to give a run, or council meeting, whatever you wish, to give a rundown of where we're at. And
I believe a budget meeting. At this point, we've already made decisions with respect to the project going forward, and that's to meet, of course, funding limitations with respect to EMBC funding and federal funding and limits on time. So this project is going ahead, and but I think it would be good to have a update, especially for newer councillors, with respect of how this all has come in place and what the context for it all is, because it's been quite some time that this work has been taking place to get to this point now. So appreciate it. So we'll maybe if we could get them to come in and during a committee of the whole, would be great. Councillor Horgan.
Yeah, I'm just going to basically say the same thing. I'd like to hear from an expert, because it seems to, yeah, you look like an expert, but it seems to be getting a little bit ridiculous. We're talking about what are we talking about, a 100-year flood or a 1,000-year flood or a 500-year flood? We're talking about an earthquake, we're talking about liquefaction all at the same time. What's next? Is there media going to come down and whack it? You can't plan for everything. No. You can't plan for everything. I don't know. I just feel that we are wasting an awful lot of money, of taxpayers' money here, just on the chance that there could be an earthquake the same time as there's a flood.
I appreciate, but I think it would be helpful to understand the context as to why all of these infrastructure plans have taken place, and why the province and the federal government have supported funding a substantial amount of these.
I think because they're all reading the same comics. I think they're looking at Superman.
It's to mitigate
he's coming next. He'll be next.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It's to mitigate flooding that has already taken place, and so that's and protect our infrastructure. So we'll bring somebody in to give a good overview of the flood protection plans and that kind of thing. So,
but just to clarify, they're not built to withstand both at the same time. I mean, the flood pump will, but it needs to be able to, whether it happens together or separately.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter.
Or any degree in between.
It either withstands, it can either keep up with the flood waters, the pump from behind, that's the intent of it. It's a pump station that collects all of the area of the Cliffs Road and City of Duncan and funnels down into the pump station. It pumps it over the dike. It's built to a seismic standard to withstand an earthquake, so that if we have one, it's going to function, because it's going to take well over a year to repair. You can't just, if it tumbles, if we give it no seismic standard and it tumbled, we'd have no pump station, and then we would flood from the inside.
Yes.
Versus the dikes that are built just to the 1 in 200, and if they do settle in an earthquake, we will top them up. So they are not built to the standard.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay. And we'll have someone come in and go over it in overall context. And I think then you can ask a great deal of questions, and that would be helpful.
Good.
Okay. So I'm going to call the question on the motion if there's no further discussion on it. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We move to 7.6, which is the appointment of would be a new advisory board for City Council, which is the Community Advisory Board for the Aboriginal Homelessness Project. And I believe that was the project that was funded through was it the province, I think, funded
it's
that a few
federal.
years ago?
Federal funding,
Okay, it was
yes.
additional funding that was brought into. And so Councillor Jackson has been attending that appointment essentially.
Forever.
Yes, for some time, and so we're just going to, was there a question of the fact that they were asking whether your appointment was carrying on or not?
No, it occurred to me that we had gone through this whole approval process as part of the, inaugural
Annual
council
meeting,
annual meeting. And I thought, wait a second, I've been going to these meetings for 5 years and it's never really been shown on the radar, so which is why I brought it to staff attention.
Now, it is council's prerogative to have those as liaison committees, and we can have as many as we want or not. So it's not a requirement, and it's more important when we're having committees that would engage staff time directly as, or effort support, it would require support.
Basically, this is totally self-serving. It requires none of our staff time. They have their own staff, because at this point, it's a community advisory board which could do a whole bunch of things around homelessness, but right now it's only working with the House of Friendship. So it's very self-contained, and they really want somebody from the city to be appointed to that. They're a great group of people, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't even recall how I first got on it. I have no idea. So
Again, it's not, because it is a liaison, it's essentially a statement to say that we're supportive of that and providing some liaisons for them. So in essence, if we're agreeing to the appointment, we're adding that as a liaison committee to our list. Ms. Robertson, would you like to speak to that?
I was just going to say my apologies, because I actually did put a recommendation in the staff report. It just didn't get transferred on to the agenda page, which was just to appoint Councillor Jackson, because I believe it is a voting member position, and we do have a list of the liaisons, which is also helpful when it comes to voting if there is anything that were to come to council. So
Okay. So the motion would be to
in the staff report is that council appoint Councillor Jackson as the council liaison, in brackets, voting member to the Community Advisory Board for the Aboriginal Homelessness Project.
Okay. Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Move to grants and aid 8.11, and this is
Reports of committees.
with respect to
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
with respect to the grants and aid policy, that sections 5 and 6 of the grants and aid policy be amended to change the date to the application deadline for February 15th to September 15th each year, so that grants and aid can be considered in conjunction with the budget deliberations, and that section 7 be added to the policy that states that funds will be paid out in February of the following year.
So moved.
Okay, seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. So just to clarify, that means that September 15th, 2016, and then the money goes to them in February 2017. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jackson?
What happens this year if somebody wants to apply and they figure they have till February? I mean, who's going to fall through the cracks here? Anybody?
Ms. Soldera can answer that question.
Okay.
So for 2016, our application process has not changed. We've just recently sent out the grant and aid applications, and council will be reviewing them in March. So people do have till February this year. We've notified all of those grant applicants that the process will change for next year, and we will be seeking early applications.
Thank you.
Okay. So all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Move to 8.1.2. This is with respect to the planning students, that council authorized pre-budget approval for the hiring of the 2 planning students for 2016. And that's moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Questions? No? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 8.2, the November 30th, 2015 Committee of the Whole recommendations capital budget. And I believe Committee of the Whole is Councillor Staples.
No, it's done,
No?
isn't it?
No, it
Was
was due in November, that's why I was looking at you,
right.
because I was thinking this
Right,
is your
right, right.
thing.
Of course, it's still November.
Okay.
So for this one, it was you?
Mhm.
Yes? Okay,
It was
thank you.
me.
There's just the one, two recommendations.
Okay, so 8.2, point 1, fire department lockers, that early budget approval of up to 15,000 be granted for the purchase of lockers for the fire department.
So moved.
Any discussion?
Yeah. I'll call that part.
Oh, sorry.
Any discussion? Thank you.
I
Councillor
think it's
Jackson?
important to say why we're spending this amount of money. They, the lockers that they have presently are very old. They're very narrow. They're about, I think, 1 foot wide or something. These ones are going to be up to 2 feet wide, considerably wider anyway, that is going to be able to allow their equipment to air out. So in other words, they're at a terrible fire, their clothes get filled with smoke and particulate matter and get wet, and then they just hang in these little tiny weeny lockers. These lockers are going to be able to air them out and be able to hang their coats so that the coats will actually be able to dry out between call-outs.
Okay, Councillor Horgan?
I think the question has been answered. I
Yes.
was almost terrified to mention the fire department because I always get spanked when I talk about them. But if that's a fact that they need a wider, larger locker, then so be it. 15 grand seems to be a lot of money, but there we go. It's the fire department. What the heck?
Just to explain that, I think they've got something in the bottom of it. I mean, maybe Mr. Duvertai can explain it better, but they've got something like underneath it that actually sucks the bad particulate matter and everything out. So it's not just like a box on the wall. It's considerably more than that.
Okay. They're not your average high school locker.
No.
Yeah.
And I would like to remind everyone that this is a volunteer fire department.
I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. The November 17th Tourism Committee recommendation, and I will ask Councillor Duncan to make the motion.
Thank you. I'd like to move that Council's authorized staff to award the contract for the City of Duncan Tourism Marketing Strategy to Hot House Marketing for the quoted price of $15,000 plus GST.
And that's moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any discussion? Context? If
I would just
Councillor
like to
Duncan,
say we had, I believe it was 5 applicants. Five shortlisted. And we had quite a discussion around the 5 proposals. And we spent most of the morning reviewing them and then went to vote. And these were the people that we felt are going to do a good job for us. So we're looking forward to that for the new year.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
I totally have faith in the decision of the tourism committee, so I don't question your decision, but I would be interested in finding out, like, is this the lowest quote? What was the next nearest one thing? And not that it has to be the lowest quote, but I just
I'll
would
ask
be
Mr.
interested to
Duvertai
know that.
answer that,
Yeah,
please.
it was the lowest quote, and it was actually quite a bit lower than any of the others, and Ms. May and myself checked 3 of their references, and both really very, very positive references.
I did
So we're-
read that, so,
We
yeah.
were quite happy to move forward with.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. So I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So we move to bylaws. We have bylaw 9.1, which is the financial plan amendment bylaw for the fire hall seismic upgrade. And this is for adoption, that council adopt the financial plan amendment bylaw number 3137.02, 2015, a bylaw to utilize up to $220,000 from gas tax funds towards the fire hall seismic upgrade project.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Duncan.
Now, if I recall correctly, wasn't there a change in the gas tax funding that allowed us to do this? So it wasn't covered when we started the project, but now it is. Great, thank you.
Correct, okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.2, which is with respect to fees and charges amendment bylaw. And that council give first 3 readings, the City of Duncan Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw number 3149, 2015, a bylaw to amend the sewer and garbage fees, and the housekeeping a housekeeping amendment to the animal control impoundment fees.
So moved.
Okay, seconded. Any discussion? Ms. Robertson, would you like to just give any context to this?
This bylaw was as a result of some motions that were considered during the budget deliberations, and Ms. Oldero's report had advised council that the garbage fees are being reduced from $136 to $131 per household and from $119 to $114. So that's being reflected in this fees and charges amendment, as well as some consideration for the sewer fees, because there is going to be, with the new sewer outfall, there's going to be some additional expenditures, and rather than there being a large increase, the Director of Finance was recommending there be a more gradual increase. So that would mean a 2% increase for 2016, which will take the 2016 increase from 5% to 7%. And then the last proposed amendment was with all the information related to the fees and charges bylaw, along with the animal regulation control bylaw and the fines bylaws. We had about 4 of them that council considered. There was one section that was missed in the bylaw that would be to eliminate the old impounding and maintenance fees. So it's just to clean that off the books formally.
Okay, thank you. So any discussion or questions from council? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Move to item 9.3. This is with respect to business license regulation amendment bylaw, first 3 readings, and that the council give first 3 readings to the business license regulation amendment bylaw number 3117.01 bylaw to include provisions to make it clear to applicants that all laws, local, provincial, and federal, must be adhered to in order for a business license to be granted.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Discussion? Okay, hearing none. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Sorry, I was going to defer to you to have some more elaboration on that. If you would, just for the
sure,
for the public
maybe
record.
just because this will be pertinent to the next 3 bylaws that council is going to consider. And I thought it might be beneficial for council and for the viewing public to have just a bit of background information about the differences related to local, provincial, and federal laws associated with medical marijuana use generally, and also the difference between the medical marijuana use versus medical marijuana licensed producers and medical marijuana storefront dispensaries or compassion clubs you will often hear, and why these bylaws are being brought forward for council tonight. So if I could maybe just do a little bit of an overview on that.
Thank you.
So right now with federal law, marijuana is governed through the criminal law, which is through the Federal Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. And this act states that cannabis is a prohibited substance, and under no law is it permissible for a person to go to any sort of premise, commercial or otherwise, to purchase marijuana, even if they are an authorized user. There are 2 exceptions to that act, though, and that relates to licensed producers. And they have what's called the Marijuana for Medical Purposes Regulation, so an MMPR. And this was enacted in April 14th of 2014. And it allows authorized licensed producers to distribute the product, and this is via secure shipping with child-resistant packaging. It's not through a retail storefront. The second exception is through what's called the Marijuana Medical Access Regulation, or MMAR. And this was the regulation that was in place prior to the April 14th regulation coming in, and there was licenses issued. It was in effect supposed to be abolished, but there's actually a court challenge on it right now, and so for the time being, anybody who did get a license under that regulation is currently being, what's the word I'm looking for? It's allowable, grandfather, thank you, that's what I was like. So despite that, it's important to note that under both the old and the new regulation that the storefront dispensaries and compassion clubs are still considered illegal. So now we go to the local bylaws, and the city's current business bylaw requires nonprofit societies and businesses to have a valid business license, and storefront marijuana dispensary business license are being denied because of the illegal use under federal law. And so some staff reports on this topic were previously provided to council, and the recent one was in July 2015, and council confirmed by resolution that the city will not be issuing business licenses to storefront dispensaries at this time. What is proving to be confusing to applicants, though, is the differences between the local, provincial, and federal laws related to medical marijuana storefronts, which have been popping up in various jurisdictions lately. And despite the fact that they are considered illegal under federal law, in the absence of local bylaws through business license and zoning in particular to support that federal law, enforcement for those violating the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act and the associated regulations actually falls to the RCMP. And the drawback to that is that RCMP resources are stretched and it is hard for them to keep up. Also, the local government loses control as to where and how many storefronts get established. So this is why it's really important to have business and zoning bylaws in place in advance of the federal law changing, as number one, no one knows exactly what that legality might look like, and two, it ensures council has the opportunity to make thoughtful, not rushed decisions about the look and feel of the community with public input once the law does change. The difficulty has arisen in other communities where they don't have those bylaws, or whether they have a business license or the use regulated by zoning. And so, of course, as mentioned, it falls to the RCMP with little control by the municipality. And this has resulted in proliferation of dispensaries in some communities. And the RCMP have recently been taking a more aggressive enforcement stance in these communities. So with the first bylaw that Council just moved and seconded, what it will do by implementing these changes is it will require anyone selling, nonprofit or otherwise, to have a business license. But we're still having that difficulty explaining all the different rules to all the different applicants, and it begins to be a big letter writing campaign. And so it's for these reasons that we're recommending amendments to make it clear that all local, provincial, and federal laws must be adhered to, nonprofit or not, when applying to establish a business. And it also supports the RCMP's enforcement efforts until such time as marijuana is deemed legal by the federal government and what that might look like. So that's out for the business license.
Okay, thank you. So we'd already called the question on that motion, so that's taken forward. So we'll move on to item 9.4, which is bylaw 3081, intercommunity business license amendment bylaw, and that's for 3 readings. And if you could just give a little context on that. I'll get a mover and seconder first. So moved, seconder, okay.
Okay, so in the staff report that's attached to the agenda, the intercommunity business license bylaw is a scheme where the city is a participant with 12 other municipalities in an intercommunity business license scheme. And those that have a business that moves from community to community can obtain this kind of license that would basically allow them to operate a mobile business in any of the participating municipalities with just the one license. And although one of the conditions of getting one of those licenses is that the local bylaws of that jurisdiction have to be adhered to, staff are still recommending that marijuana-related business be added to the list of excluded businesses from participating in this business license scheme. And staff are working with the other 12 communities to have that same provision included in their bylaws.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Councillor Jackson.
Just a point of clarification. I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I always thought that the intercommunity business licenses were for like roofers and people that did eaves troughs and had trucks and traveled around, not like storefronts who had a store in Nanaimo and a store in Ladysmith and a store in Duncan. So why is it necessary to do this when it was supposed to be for mobile businesses? Is this again just covering loopholes?
It's just to cover the bases on that. Your Worship, what this is, it's added to Schedule A of that bylaw, which is so it's the very last page. There's a markup of the in your agenda. It's 3081 intercommunity business license bylaw markup, which shows the introduction of that. The other prohibited, excluded businesses, I should say, in the rest of that schedule include social escort services, vehicles for hire like taxis, so that you can't take that mobile business license and start to use. So let's say, for example, that Nanaimo had given out a dispensary license to someone in absence of changing something like this. It could be argued that they could take that and to have mobile sales in the city of Duncan with social escorts or marijuana-related businesses. So it's just to again provide that clarity.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that what we're doing here is we're putting the horse before the cart. Yeah, we don't even have rules yet from the federal government. We know that it's going to become legal. And at that stage, we're going to have to then change these bylaws that we're proposing to pass tonight. I just think that I would rather see what the federal government's going to come down with. And, you know, big cities like Vancouver and Victoria have already looked at this issue. They have zoning around whether you can have them close to schools or not. So I think that we're sort of jumping the gun here.
Okay. Any further discussion? Councillor Bell?
I like to ride my cart with the horse in front. So I don't know about you, but you should have the horse before the cart. So I'm in favor of this because I think we need to get ahead of it. And then I think if things change, we can change it. I'm not concerned about losing business taxes or, you know, possible businesses, because we'll also lose businesses if we say, yay, let's get on the dispensary bandwagon and we open up, we become the little city of the most dispensaries. We're going to lose a lot of the businesses that have been around here a long time and have sustained Duncan for a long time. So, you know, we have to decide, you know, now, before everything happens, what kind of city of Duncan we want. And I don't think it's a personal whether we prefer to smoke marijuana or not. It's just about making sure that we can regulate it and making sure that we can have it in the right areas, and we actually have that conversation before it comes down. And then if it's not working, we can always change it. So I'm in favor.
I appreciate that we're getting into a broader kind of discussion about the issue with respect to this particular bylaw. We're talking about the intermunicipal business license and the use in that, so that it's specifically stated. Okay, any further discussion on that? I'm going to call the question in. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan opposed, and the motion carries. So we move to item 9.5, which is bylaw 3150, 2015 rezoning amendment, and this is for 2 readings. The council give first, second reading to bylaw 3150, 2015, a bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 1540, 1988, to add marijuana operation to the list of prohibited uses in all zones, and the council set a public hearing date for January 4th, 2016 for bylaw number 3150, 2015, and direct staff to undertake the required advertisement for the public hearing. Is there a mover? Moved. Seconder? Seconded. Okay. And discussion. And maybe I'll allow Ms. Robertson just to give again some context to that first, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so at the October 31st Committee of the Whole meeting, staff had advised council that they would be looking into how medical marijuana dispensaries may fit into the community through the new zoning bylaw, which staff is currently working on. And while it's substantially complete, it still requires an internal and a legal review and public consultation. And so as currently the city has no way of knowing when and what changes the federal government will make to marijuana laws, this proposed amendment would ensure that once the government introduces that legislation, council can take a measured approach in considering appropriate regulations and locations for this type of business by either 1, considering applications on a case-by-case basis through a zoning amendment application. And the advantage to this is that the surrounding property owners would be notified and given an opportunity to comment through a public hearing process. Or 2, council could revise the zoning bylaw to permit medical marijuana dispensaries under specific conditions, such as minimum distance from schools. And although only 1 opportunity would be provided for a public hearing at that stage, and no specific notification would be required for that option, but they would come forward at a future date once the law changes. We would bring forward that report.
Okay. So I have one question of clarification on this one. With respect to it talks about the bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 1540 to add marijuana operation. Now, you talked about some exceptions in the federal legislation with respect to medical marijuana and the way it's distributed. So it was illegal to distribute it through any retail, but they could distribute it through some form of secure shipping. So this seems to appear to be just focused directly on marijuana operation and doesn't I'm just wondering, is it because of the one we passed earlier with respect to the first one with respect to all conforming to federal, provincial, and local statutes? Does that cover off that statement in all other bylaws? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I'm not sure what you're saying, but
Because it doesn't say specifically in here, it doesn't say specifically here that, it doesn't seem to allow those exceptions that might have been already allowed under federal statute, in other words, they were legal, like a grow-up.
Yeah, that would not be applicable. Anybody who's
Okay,
been approved.
that's why I was trying to
and-
get the clarity into
Yeah,
it.
so somebody that's been given a specific license under the medical access regulation would be grandfathered to this. Those
Okay.
uses would be, specific and already approved, so this would not be
Okay.
applicable.
Okay, thank you. That was my clarifying question. Any further discussion or question? Councillor Duncan and Councillor Staples.
Thank you, Your Worship. So when the federal laws come in, will we have to go through a public hearing process again?
To any type of zoning amendment, yes, you would need to do a public hearing.
So again, I say, I think we're going ahead with changes that we're going to be paying for twice here.
Thank you. Councillor Staples.
So one of the things, I don't know that I want us to wait until we have the federal, until we know exactly what the federal government is doing. I believe we can still look at what would work best for the city to some degree. So I'd like to start that discussion sooner rather than later, so that whatever the federal government decides, we actually have some idea of what will work best for our community. And then I would just like to reiterate my suggestion to that we send some form of correspondence to the federal government requesting that they consider something like a gas tax gets put in for municipalities and cities for marijuana businesses.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? I will suggest at this point that this gives at least some clarity for applicants and provides a support to staff. The zoning bylaw is under review right now, and in fact, I think is in first draft at this point. So there will be, it is being undertaken right as we speak, and so that will be following fairly quickly once these things pass and we give direction to staff to provide some zoning draft amendments for this specific thing. I think in the letter to the federal government, we should also ask that they clarify this as quickly as possible. I think that the longer this goes, the more question it and difficulty it provides to local communities. So,
Point of information would be, that sound like a separate motion, writing a letter.
I think we probably should be separated from the bylaw. Unless we'll just deal with the bylaw and we can have a separate motion. I agree. And Councillor Bell.
Well, I was just gonna request that we have Councillor Staples' suggestion of sending us some tax in the letter.
We'll handle that as a separate motion
Yeah.
and then from here. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to call the question on if there's no further discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Duncan opposed. Councillor Staples, would you like to make a motion with respect to communication with the federal government?
Yes, I would like to make the motion that the City of Duncan send a letter to the federal government requesting that when they come up with the new federal legislation for marijuana, any type of marijuana operation, I'm not sure how to word that, but Karen, I know you will word that properly, that we request that something similar to a gas tax gets put onto that for cities and municipalities. With
Okay.
the
Second.
Is there a
That
seconder
motion.
for that?
Yeah.
Okay. So any discussion on that? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duncan opposed? No. No, you're in favor of that part. Okay.
All for the tax.
Is this a late hand? Okay, that's okay.
In fact, I'd like to also put another motion on it. I can do it under new business.
I think that would be more appropriate. It's because there was no notice of new motion with respect. This was related only to that one. I just want to be,
Then you can decide.
okay. Just hang on, Ms. Robertson, just clarity on due process.
Related to this specific topic, then.
Okay, it's
Yeah,
okay
you
to
could-
accept,
you
all right.
just Write to Vancouver, City of Vancouver, get a copy of their
Can you
bylaws.
use your microphone, please? Yes, thanks. That would be direction to staff. I don't know that it requires a motion. I think we could do that with just staff gets it.
Yeah, the other thing we have to be mindful of is the City of Vancouver is not under the same legislation that we
They
are.
are
They are
not.
under
They have their
community
own charter,
charter, so
yes.
their rules and regs are different than us. I'm not sure if they've completed that, but we'll look into it.
Other people's bylaws when we bring forward the zoning bylaw, and we will be considering marijuana
operations within the new zoning bylaw.
Okay. Does that satisfy? I think it's well in what's taking place, and it's just giving emphasis to direction for staff. Okay, much appreciated. Thank you. So we move to new business then, and we have a proclamation with respect to BC Aware 2016, Be Secure, Be Aware Days, and a motion to.
I move the motion.
Did we do 9.6? Sorry. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead one
Okay.
agenda item. Actually, can we just back up slightly? For bylaw offense notice enforcement amendment bylaw for 3 readings, and Ms. Robertson, give context to that one as well.
It's pretty self-evident.
So this one is the same as with any regulatory bylaw. In order to assign fines for violations of that particular bylaw, you need to change the bylaw offense notice enforcement amendment. So you'll see this bylaw frequently each time there's a bylaw amendment of anything that's regulatory. This is where you have to make that change as well.
Okay, great, just so that everybody knows. Okay, any discussion on this one? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we move to item 10.1, which is the proclamation, and a mover for
So
that.
moved.
Move Councillor Jackson. Okay, seconder. Any discussion? Councillor Jackson.
I just think it's worth mentioning that this proclamation is in regard to cybercrime and the number of people who get tricked by evil people into thinking that they either have porn on their computers or that they're sending out spam, and they ask for PIN numbers, they ask for usernames and passwords because people are afraid and freaked out at what they're being told by people who are supposedly experts and they're not. And I just want everybody to know that the Cowichan Warmland Police, the community policing, runs classes on this and senior safety in regard to cybercrime. So, and when they do run those classes, I think they put a notice in the paper. So if it's something that you're concerned about, I urge you to take those classes because they're very good.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we move to item 10, which is a late item. Letter from Lynn Weaver, Executive Director of Cowichan Intercultural Society, regarding the community capacity and interest for refugee immigration. This was something that I had been circulating to council with respect to a meeting we had with the Regional District Chair, Mayor Lefebvre, and myself and others, the school district and others, to develop some questions around capacity. And this is essentially a follow-up from the Intercultural Society to us, requesting that we sign this letter with respect to that. And they also asked for a grant and aid, although it was somewhat informally included in the same letter. So I'm not sure, we might want to separate those things.
Yes.
I would suggest that might be the case. So the recommendation that council we consider the following: that the mayor be authorized to sign the letter to the Honourable John McCallum regarding community capacity and interest for refugee integration for the Cowichan Valley, as attached to the December 21st, 2015 agenda. And so we'll do that separately from the grant request.
So moved.
So moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, I don't really understand the question exactly. Who decides the capacity? Who's?
It was the
Where does this go?
Intercultural Society undertook that work to try to bring a collective of those who were private sponsors, and the federal government's intent with respect to government-sponsored refugees, and consider how many we might receive in the Cowichan Valley area, and how many, from a capacity standpoint, we would be able to welcome reasonably, and that, so there was, they coordinated amongst island mayors, and I think I did send those emails out where they were communicating with all communities on Vancouver Island. It was being headed by Mayor Victoria, Lisa Helps, and just to develop a capacity list to see where there was actual capacity. At that time, there was no particular numbers being identified, but that BC would be receiving 10 or 3,000 of those refugees, so they would be dispersed. So that meeting was requested by the Intercultural Society with the chair of the regional district and myself and the school district people and others to consider where there was space in schools, what the housing situation was like, and we of course made it quite clear that there were issues with housing here. We have a very, very low vacancy rate in the Cowichan Valley, and that's a challenge. And those things were then considered to develop this letter with respect to the capacity that was available in the Cowichan Valley.
So you and a few others would dictate how many that Duncan could take,
No,
is that what you're saying?
no, we would not. I think that's fully the purview of the federal government with respect to where they go, and then of course there are sponsors, both it's the immigration issues are complex with respect to refugees, but there are sponsors specifically, other church organizations or other groups of people who would get together and sponsor a particular refugee family, and then they would be their support under the regulations. Then there's the government-sponsored ones, which are the federal government makes those decisions. But developing the issues around which communities can actually support them or not was part of this exercise being facilitated through the Intercultural Society.
Okay, it's just that it's a very important part of these people's lives to make sure that they're integrated properly.
And that there's support here for them.
Exactly.
That was basically the result of the exercise from there, and they simply asked
just
us
having 3 or 4 people with good intentions put their arm up and say, yeah, you can come here, and then they,
yeah.
No,
No,
they're
it was
no
considered,
better off than they were.
It's been considered quite carefully.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Councillor Staples.
I've attended a few of the different open house sort of forums that there have been around this, and there is a lot of local support by numerous organizations. It's not just individuals, so it's being considered very carefully.
Okay. So is any further discussion or questions? I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So the second item was with respect to a grant and aid to be provided to Cowichan Intercultural Society for the purposes of running ads and billboards for a Mythbuster campaign to spread accurate information from around Syria, Islam, and refugees. And is there, there's no amount. They gave a range in the letter. It was in the same letter, which you all saw, so I'll take, I've got Councillor Jackson.
I would be, at this point, opposed to this. We have a policy. If they want some money, they have to fill out a grant and aid policy and tell us exactly what they're going to do with it. I am completely opposed to hiring billboards to do myth busting. I don't mind running ads. I don't mind doing, other different kinds of advertising, but we would, like, in the heat of the moment, because we're kind and good people with open hearts, we think, oh, sure, we'll give them $500. Nobody else would be able to do this without having to account for what they're going to spend the money on. So I'm not opposed to giving them money, but I want them to go through the process like everybody else has to go through the process.
Thank you. Councillor Horgan.
I would be opposed to this vehemently. I think that this is totally wrong. I totally agree with helping refugees. I would personally help feed them, house them, clothe them, educate them, try to get them jobs. But as for bringing religion into it, I think that's just pretty wicked. I think that's an awful thing to do to start. You can look like that, Councillor Jackson, but
no, this is not a debate between two councillors.
No, I just would like to explain
when he's concluded.
The way I read it was that they wanted to advertise Islam and to educate us ignorant people about Islam. I think that there is, as soon as religion gets involved in situations like this, it makes life awful for everybody. And like I said, I'd be more than welcome to help these people in any way I can, but I wouldn't be thinking about spending one penny on advertising to try to educate us people about their religion, because that's just an awful way to go about it. I'm not explaining myself very well, but it's very frustrating.
Fair enough. Okay. Thank you, Councillor States.
One thing that I would like to do, I'm not opposed to having to fill out an application form. I have a question though before I finish what I wanted to say. Do we still have money left in our 2015? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So that I wanted to just clarify that. So I feel like it would be nothing to ask that they fill out a form, and I also want for us to think about this and maybe put it on but I'd like to put it onto an agenda in the new year, that we do leave a certain percentage of funds in our grant and aid, because we do have things that come up last minute. And so this just reminds me of that we still haven't had that we need to have that conversation. And in terms of the information and the billboard, I've worked around and been at hundreds of things over the years that the Couch and Cultural Society has done. And I can tell you that there is no way they are going to do anything that would spread any type of propaganda or do anything without the utmost respect and diligence to the people that they serve. I have great faith in anything that they would come up with, and that they wouldn't even discuss doing something like this in a way that wasn't necessary. And so I would actually completely support them in this with some funding. And we could always ask that we see the ad before it goes out. But I know that there's nothing that they've ever done for all the clients that I've ever seen from all the different nationalities that's ever been directed at any type of propaganda. So
At this point, we don't actually have a motion on the floor, and so I'm giving quite a bit of latitude to speak to the issue without a motion, but...
I'll make a motion.
Okay. We'll allow Councillor Duncan, because I've given you all free, and then I'll take a motion after that if somebody has one. Councillor Duncan.
Okay, yes, I have to speak in favor of going through the due process of the grant and aids, that we can't jump ahead and just say, here's some money. We've made everyone else go through a process. These people should be going through the same process. And I think that because there is some concern about exactly what the campaign might be, I would want to see exactly what the campaign is talking about before I sent any money there. And I also believe that we passed a motion earlier in the year saying that we will spend all the money in the grant fund and we wouldn't be holding any over. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
And I will take the motion. I'll take your motion now.
Okay, so my motion would be that we ask the Couch and Cultural Society to fill out a grant and aid application with a request, and that we articulate to them that we would like to see the billboard before we make our decision. Not the billboard, but to see a mock-up.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion? Okay, discussion on the actual motion. Councillor, can you use your microphone, please? Because it doesn't broadcast through the internet if you don't.
I feel the same way about grant and aids, and I've said this about everyone that's come later, so I'll just say it because I might as well be consistent. I like having all the grant and aids and all the decisions there so I can weigh it out, and then I just think if I were in that process and I didn't get my grant and aid, if I knew I could just put an application in a little bit later and we would trickle it out, I might do that. So for me, making the decision, it seems like it's a lot of pressure, and we're kind of doing it at the gun. And then if I know this is coming up now, but somebody came in a month prior and put one in, and I gave that money out to them. And so for me, if it's not during grant and aid process, because we are not technically a funder and we have a budget to go on, for me, I prefer not to do grant and aids later.
Councillor Staples?
Well, I can appreciate that. At the same time, there's always going to be instances in life that don't follow a timeline. So we can have all the timelines that we set up, and there's emergency situations, and there's things that happen last minute. And so if and when we're able to, and we do have funds available right now, address that, then I am willing to accept the fact that part of the way that life works is that there are times when it doesn't fall under a granting cycle.
Okay. So any further discussion? If not, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? So that's, yeah, those opposed, 3. So the motion passes. So with respect to that, the motion was to ask them to submit a grant and aid application, so that's according to policy. With just a closing comment on the issue, because this did come in as a light item, and I appreciate that it's something that's in front of us, and it's got some urgency because people are arriving. One of the challenges we're going to have, and I have had, because I'm in the middle of replying to an email from someone with respect to information that they had with respect to the refugees, and it's quite a challenge to try to answer all of the questions posed with respect to their perspective on this. And so good communications around policy, I think, is something that the federal government should do, because it's their policy to go forward doing this, and that kind of respectful education around people is in their purview, and I think that we should work with them if we can, and look at the way we have our internal communications and with respect to when people say falsehoods with respect to their perception about other people, and whether that was refugees or First Nations or race or gender or anything else. So I think we'll consider that when it comes to us in an actual application. We know what we're talking about. Okay, so thank you for the discussion.
Are you saying the federal government has funding for that?
I don't know that they do. I just simply saying that I believe because of it's a federal policy, it's something that they should be making sure that that kind of communication and education is put out through the program. Okay, so we move then to reports of mayor and council. And are there any councillors who would like to report? Councillor Jackson? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to pass because I was in such a rush to get here and have not actually been able to review my calendar, and I'm not certain if it was even in my basket. It probably was. Thank you. That's okay. I'll pass and report to council at the next meeting on those events. Okay. So, Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thank you. December the 7th, I was at the last Community Advisory Board for Aboriginal homelessness. We realized that our responsibilities are actually far broader than just the Aboriginal homelessness, that in fact we could do a whole bunch of other things. The question being, do we have the skills, abilities, and the time to do that? And in fact, I'm not thinking that we do as a committee, and that the fact that we would be probably working with the Cowichan Housing Society that they talked about earlier, because they seem to have done a whole bunch of preliminary work. So our group will be looking to either partner with them or learn from them, and we're coming up with the terms of reference a little bit late in the day, but it's still getting done, and that will happen over January and February. And I just want to not only wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and Blessed Yule and whatever else you happen, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, and just to let everybody know that on New Year's, December 31st, between 5 and 8 o'clock at the Island Savings Center, there is going to be a free skate with face painting and games and prizes, and they're going to have a countdown to 8 o'clock with noisemakers and everything, and it's all free. Except for you have to register, so please call the Island Savings Center and register you and your children so that you can have a fun, free evening on New Year's Eve. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It sounds like a resurrection of First Night, does it not?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, it used to be that. Yeah. Oh, anyone else? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to question period. Are there any questions from council with respect to the meeting? Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Your Honor. Back in June 2011, the Council of the Day passed a motion to provide funding to the Visitor Center for 5 years at a minimum payment of $22,500. Next year is the expiry of that agreement. I guess my question is to staff is what plans have we undertaken to look at funding for the visitor center? Because in the past, we've been giving almost as much money as North Cowichan has. And that's money that's going out of our community. And we now have the Downtown Business Association doesn't partner with us on some of our materials. And we're embarking on a new tourism plan. So I think it's important for us to get on some discussions with North Cowichan around what we're going to do in the way of funding for them next year.
I believe Mr. Durvai can sort of answer that. I think these are questions of council to consider, and when we come with respect to an agreement, I'm not sure if that agreement was formal, but I think it was done through a resolution of council at the time. And so we would revisit that when, if that resolution's time lapsed, then it would be of the council to consider those questions as to how and where and when and how much we would consider to support that service.
I would agree, Your Worship, that it's ultimately council's decision whichever way you go. Currently, the city, provide $30,000 annually to the operations the last couple of years of the information center. I know it's got a much longer name than that for the moment, but it escapes me. And the last 2 years, I believe North Cowichan has also contributed $30,000. We've had some staff discussions on what appropriate cost sharing should be going forward, and the staff's positions has been use of the excuse me, use of business license proportional figures, and we're about 40% versus North Cowichan 60 if you include the south end of North Cowichan. So that's one alternative, but ultimately it's council's decision as to how much it wishes to support the visitor center going forward.
Maybe something that we need to add to one of our joint meetings with North Cowichan to consider that and really work on it. I know it was addressed before and went back to staff. They haven't been able to come to a conclusion at this point. So, okay. So that answers your question. So this is other questions, Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, we did have a bit of an interesting start to the year with the visitor centre, I must admit. But as the time has gone on, they've kind of proved to me that they work very hard on our behalf as well as their own behalf. There's only one paid employee there, and they have increased the visitors, or the visitors that they send to Duncan or that ask about Duncan. They've increased considerably from, I think, about 6,000 to 10,000 that they sent to us last year. So we are heading in the right direction, both number-wise, and attitude has changed considerably this year. And I would talk positively about looking favourably at renewing their funding again this year. We can maybe look at it again next year, and to make sure that they do give us we do get a continued increase in visitors, but they do work fairly hard on our behalf. So I would talk in a positive mode for them right now.
Okay. So we're not considering motions, these are just questions, and so it was a legitimate question. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to, we have item 13, which is resolved to go into closed meeting and a closed session, that this meeting be closed to the public under the following sections of the Community Charter. Section 91A, personal information about an identifiable person who is being considered for an appointment by the municipality. Section 91C, labor relations or other employee relations. And Section 91E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land and improvements.
And Your Worship, we should probably add 91K from the earlier closed session that we had.
Right. Would that be appropriate? Yes, because we did adjourn that meeting, so thank you. And 91K.
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries, and the motion to adjourn. Thank you. Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And so we are adjourned. We'll take a 5-minute recess and then come back for closed session.